Every single day, 20 million barrels of oil passed through the Strait of Hormuz. That was one-fifth of everything the world consumed. Iran controlled this 29-mile-wide passage between their coastline and Oman, and for decades, that control gave Tehran absolute leverage over global energy markets. Wars were threatened. Tankers were seized. Countries complied with Iranian demands or watched the global economy suffer. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps positioned missiles along every high point. Fast attack boats patrolled the waters. Mines floated just beneath the surface. Every president since Jimmy Carter understood the math. Iran controlled the bottleneck, and the world had to tolerate it. Tehran used this leverage to fund proxy wars across 4 countries: Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Palestine, Houthis in Yemen, Shiite militias in Iraq, all fed by oil revenues flowing through Hormuz. Iran's regional empire depended entirely on that single waterway remaining open on their terms. But leverage based on geography alone is only permanent until someone finds a workaround. Turkey just found one. Ankara's plan did not start yesterday. It started 20 years ago when Turkey realized something extraordinary about its geography. Turkey sits at the exact crossroads of 3 continents: Europe to the west, Asia to the east, the Middle East to the south. For centuries, empires recognized this truth. Turkey recognized it too, but in the modern era, geography was not enough. You needed infrastructure, you needed pipelines, you needed patience. So Turkey started building. The Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline was the first massive move. Completed in 2006, this 1,700-kilometer artery moves 1 million barrels of Azerbaijani oil every single day from the Caspian Sea to the Mediterranean port of Ceyhan. 1 million barrels that never touch Hormuz. 1 million barrels that Russia cannot threaten with pipeline politics. 1 million barrels that Iran cannot threaten with naval posts. By 2018, Turkey added something even more transformative. The Trans-Anatolian natural gas pipeline stretches 1,811 kilometers, making it the longest and widest pipeline in Turkey, the Middle East, and Europe. This monster tube connects Azerbaijan's massive Shah Deniz gas field directly to Greece, Albania, and ultimately Italy. 12 billion cubic meters of gas per year now flow through Turkey to European homes, completely bypassing every single chokepoint Iran controls. But Turkey did not stop with pipelines. Ankara built storage facilities capable of holding enough gas to stabilize markets during any disruption. The Tuz-Gerlu facility targets 8.5 billion cubic meters. The Silivri facility targets 6 billion more. Turkey transformed from a simple transit route into an actual marketplace, a place where energy prices get set, not just passed through. $40 billion, 7 major pipeline systems, 20 provinces crossed, decades of diplomatic work, construction projects, and strategic patience. Turkey was not just building infrastructure. Turkey was building a trap, one that would only spring when the moment was right. The moment just arrived. In March 2026, everything changed. U.S. and Israeli forces launched strikes on Iran following months of escalating tensions. Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps forces responded by declaring the Strait of Hormuz closed, effective immediately. 20 million barrels per day. Gone, just like that. The market reaction was instantaneous and brutal. Brent crude surged past $120 per barrel within days, the highest price since 2022. European natural gas prices doubled, climbing from roughly €30 per megawatt-hour to the 60 to 70 range. Insurance costs for tankers multiplied. Ship owners refused to send vessels anywhere near Persian Gulf waters. Hundreds of tankers found themselves trapped. Thousands of sailors sat aboard vessels stuck in harbor, unable to load or discharge cargo. Some ships had waited weeks just to exit the Persian Gulf and then watched as Iranian patrol boats blocked the only route home. The U.S. Navy deployed carrier strike groups to enforce freedom of navigation, and clashes erupted almost immediately. The standoff was catastrophic. While Iran technically declared the strait open again in mid-April, just for a single day, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps reversed course within 24 hours. Commercial traffic largely stopped. The waterway remained effectively closed. And here is where Turkey's long game became absolutely critical. With Hormuz disrupted, Europe faced its worst energy crisis since the Ukraine invasion. Countries scrambled for alternative supplies. Russia saw an opportunity. Gulf states watched their export revenues collapse. China faced massive disruptions to its energy imports, but Turkey was ready. While the world panicked, Turkish Energy Minister Alpa Arslan Bayraktar went on television and laid out exactly what his country could offer. The Kirkuk-Ceyhan pipeline, already operational, could carry up to 1.5 million barrels per day from northern Iraq to the Mediterranean. Exports resumed on March 17th and climbed toward 250,000 barrels daily. Russian gas flows through the Turkstream pipeline rose 22% compared to the previous year, reaching 55 million cubic meters per day by March. Azerbaijan continued pumping through the southern gas corridor without interruption. Every single molecule that Turkey sent to Europe arrived on time, every day, regardless of what was happening in the Persian Gulf. Europe was watching. Every German industrialist, every Italian manufacturer, every Polish politician suddenly understood something their governments had been telling them for years. They needed energy alternatives that did not run through hostile waters or Russian territory. Turkey was the answer. In April 2024, before the current crisis even began, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan visited Baghdad. It was his first trip to Iraq in 13 years. The timing was not accidental. While the world focused on Gaza, Turkey was executing a completely different strategy. Erdogan and Iraqi officials signed 26 agreements that day, but one project dominated everything else: the Development Road. The Development Road is a $17 billion megaproject to build a combined railway and highway stretching from the Persian Gulf in southern Iraq directly to Turkey's Mediterranean coast. The route would connect the port of Al-Faw all the way to Istanbul and onward to Europe. It would carry everything from containerized goods to oil and gas. Qatar signed on immediately. The United Arab Emirates followed. Even Saudi Arabia expressed interest in routing their exports through this corridor instead of Hormuz. This was not just a trade route. This was a declaration of independence from Iranian geography. Think about what this means from Tehran's perspective. Every barrel of Qatari LNG, every tanker of Emirati oil, every container of Saudi goods flowing through Iraq, through Turkey, to Europe bypasses the Strait of Hormuz completely. Iran loses their leverage over Gulf states. Tehran loses billions in transit fees they never actually collected but used as threats. The entire system of Iranian regional power built on energy control simply evaporates. Current bypass capacity through Saudi Arabia and the UAE totals just 3.5 to 5.5 million barrels per day, nowhere near the 20 million flowing through Hormuz normally. But the Development Road, if completed, would change that equation fundamentally. Iraq sees this project as existential. Over 90% of Baghdad's revenue comes from oil exports. If those exports can travel safely through Turkey to European markets, bypassing Iranian-controlled waters, Iraq transforms from a sanctions-weakened state into a major transit hub. Iran's influence over Iraq shrinks dramatically. And Turkey becomes the essential link between Asia and Europe, something no pipeline has achieved before. Now let me show you what is happening to Iran right now. The numbers are devastating. According to the International Monetary Fund, Iran's economy will shrink by 6.1% in 2026. Inflation is running at 68.9%. The Iranian rial has collapsed to approximately 1.3 million per US dollar, down from already degraded levels before the conflict. Food prices have absolutely exploded. Bread and cereals have risen 140%. Cooking oils and fats are up 219%. Basic subsistence is becoming unaffordable for ordinary Iranians who had already been suffering through years of sanctions. The Iranian central bank recently introduced a 10 million rial banknote, the largest denomination in the nation's history. Economists describe this as an admission that the financial system cannot handle the pressure anymore. But here is what truly matters for the long term. Iran's energy infrastructure has been shattered. U.S. and Israeli strikes targeted refineries, power plants, and oil export facilities across the country. According to retired U.S. Army Colonel Seth Crumrich, a security analyst with Global Guardian, Iran has suffered an estimated $200 billion to $270 billion in infrastructure damage. The strikes represent the most acute economic wound from this conflict. The U.S. Navy has established an effective blockade of Iranian ports. Pentagon estimates indicate Iran has already lost $4.8 billion in oil revenues due to the American naval presence. With over 90% of Iran's international trade passing through Hormuz, The blockade has cut off the regime's primary source of hard currency. China, Iran's largest trading partner and the country most dependent on Iranian oil, has tried to maintain business relationships. But the Trump administration has threatened secondary sanctions on Chinese banks facilitating transactions with Tehran. The message is clear. Do business with Iran, lose access to the American financial system. Senior Iranian economic officials have reportedly warned President Masoud Pezeshkian that recovery could take more than a decade. Central Bank Governor Abdel Nasser Hemati has urged immediate steps toward peace negotiations with the United States. And the reason for this desperation is simple: Turkey. Every route Iran once used to export oil, every leverage point Tehran once held over regional rivals, all of it has been systematically undercut by Turkish infrastructure and diplomacy. While Iran was threatening to close Hormuz, Turkey was finalizing agreements to route the same goods around Tehran entirely. Before the current crisis, energy flowed from the Persian Gulf through Hormuz to markets everywhere. Iran controlled that flow not by owning the tankers, but by controlling the passage. Every Gulf state, every producer, every consumer had to acknowledge Tehran's position. Now look at what Turkey has built. The Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline moves Caspian oil to the Mediterranean without touching a single Iranian waterway. TANAP carries Azerbaijani gas to Europe through Turkey, not Hormuz. The development road offers an overland alternative for every Gulf state that wants to avoid Iranian-controlled waters. The Southern Gas Corridor alone now transports 12 billion cubic meters annually, enough to supply millions of European homes. The Trans-Adriatic pipeline has just been expanded by 1.2 billion cubic meters of additional capacity. 4 new gas projects are expected to come online by 2027, doubling Azerbaijan's exports to Europe. Azerbaijan has increased gas exports to Europe by 56% in recent months. The entire corridor is running at full capacity, while global energy markets remain in turmoil. Europe is diversifying away from Russian energy faster than any analyst predicted. The Ukraine crisis accelerated this process. The Hormuz crisis has made it absolutely permanent. No European government will ever again allow the kind of dependency on a single supplier or single transit route that they tolerated with Russia for decades. Turkey sits at the center of this new system. Ankara is no longer asking for a seat at the table. Turkey is the table. But this transformation is not without risks. Iran holds significant influence in Iraq through armed groups and political networks. Tehran could undermine development road construction through proxy sabotage. The security situation along the Turkey-Iraq border remains volatile, with Kurdish militant groups like the PKK complicating Turkish military operations. Many of Turkey's proposed corridors run through politically unstable regions. Iraq faces internal divisions between Baghdad, Erbil, and various factions. The South Caucasus remains contested between Azerbaijan, Armenia, and external powers. Instability could derail Turkey's ambitions just as easily as conflict advances them. Turkey has achieved something remarkable. In less than 2 decades, Ankara transformed its geographic position from a liability into an asset. Every major energy corridor now passes through Turkish territory: Caspian to Mediterranean, Azerbaijan to Europe, potential future connections from Central Asia to Indian Ocean markets. Turkish Energy Minister Bayraktar has proposed multiple new projects during the current crisis. Extensions of the Basra-to-Ceyhan pipeline could eventually carry 1.5 million barrels daily. A proposed Qatari gas pipeline through Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Syria, and Turkey remains on the table, though Doha has expressed preference for LNG flexibility for now. Syrian oil fields could eventually connect to the Iraqi pipeline network. Electricity interconnectors between Saudi Arabia and Turkey through Jordan and Syria represent longer-term possibilities for energy collaboration across the region. But the ultimate question is whether Iran can recover. Even under the most optimistic peace scenario, complete lifting of sanctions, reconstruction assistance, immediate infrastructure repairs, analysts expect prolonged economic weakness. Iran's neighbors are already rerouting their trade to avoid Hormuz dependencies. China's willingness to antagonize the United States over Iranian oil has limits. Russia's support has proven more rhetorical than material. Senior Iranian officials understand the situation. Their energy leverage, the very foundation of regional power projection, is gone, not destroyed by American bombs but made irrelevant by Turkish pipelines. Iran can rebuild its refineries. Iran can restore oil production. But Iran cannot build a new Hormuz. The strategic reality has permanently changed. Turkey is not just building energy infrastructure. Turkey is building a new kind of power based on indispensable connectivity rather than military force or ideological appeal. Look at what Ankara has achieved. Turkey has deepened cooperation with Azerbaijan through every regional realignment. Turkish Airlines has become Europe's busiest air hub, connecting Asia to European markets through Istanbul. Direct flights between Yerevan and Istanbul resumed after 6 years of suspension. Turkey and Armenia, nations with no diplomatic relations for decades, are now reconnecting through Turkish Airlines routes. Turkish Airlines now operates flights to more countries than any other carrier on Earth. Istanbul Airport handles more international passengers than any airport in Europe. While Russian airspace remains restricted and Middle Eastern routes remain contested, Turkey has become the essential connection point for global mobility. This is what real geopolitical strategy looks like. Not military conquest, not ideological expansion, just the patient, methodical construction of infrastructure, relationships, and commercial dependencies that make a country absolutely essential to everyone around it. Iran spent decades threatening and intimidating. Turkey spent decades building and connecting. The Hormuz crisis revealed which strategy actually works. Right now, oil prices remain elevated above $100 per barrel. European natural gas costs twice what it did before the Hormuz crisis. Shipping insurance premiums have tripled for vessels operating anywhere near the Persian Gulf. Global supply chains are adapting to a new reality where the world's most important energy corridor is no longer reliable. Every single day that Hormuz remains contested, you pay more for gasoline. You pay more for heating oil. You pay more for every product that travels on ships that must route around the Persian Gulf. The global economy absorbs billions in additional costs that ultimately filter down to consumer prices everywhere. Turkey's pipeline network offers Europe an alternative, not a complete replacement, but a meaningful supplement that reduces dependence on any single route. The more capacity Turkey can offer, the more stable global energy markets become. The more stable markets become, the lower your costs at the pump and the utility bill. This is why what Turkey has accomplished matters beyond geopolitics. It affects your wallet. It affects your security. It affects whether your government can pursue independent foreign policies or must kowtow to energy suppliers who control critical chokepoints. The International Energy Agency released 400 million barrels from strategic reserves to stabilize markets. But strategic reserves are a temporary fix, not a permanent solution. Europe needs permanent alternatives to Russian gas and Persian Gulf oil. Turkey is providing those alternatives. Germany, Italy, Poland, all major European economies are deepening energy partnerships with Turkey and Azerbaijan specifically because of this crisis. Contracts being negotiated today will shape European energy markets for the next 20 years. Turkey is positioned to be the essential transit hub for those markets. Turkey just executed the most consequential geopolitical maneuver of the decade. Not through military force, not through threats or intimidation. Through patience, infrastructure, and strategic positioning that made Turkey absolutely indispensable to everyone around it. Ankara now sits at the center of Eurasian energy flows. The Southern Gas Corridor carries Azerbaijani gas to Europe. The Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline moves Caspian oil to Mediterranean markets. The development road offers Gulf states an alternative to Hormuz. The Zengezur corridor could connect Central Asia to Europe without Russian or Iranian involvement. $40 billion of investment, 7 major pipeline systems, 2 decades of diplomatic work, all of it converging on this exact moment. Meanwhile, Iran faces an existential challenge. The Strait of Hormuz, once Tehran's greatest strategic asset, has become less relevant as alternatives multiply. Iran's economy is collapsing under U.S. blockade and infrastructure damage. Regional rivals are rerouting trade to avoid Iranian dependencies. Even China's support has limits given American sanctions threats. Iran can rebuild. Iran can negotiate peace. But Iran cannot unbuild the Turkish pipeline network that now exists. The strategic reality has permanently shifted. This is what real power looks like in the 21st century. not the ability to threaten closure of a waterway, the ability to make that waterway irrelevant. The Middle East is being reshaped. The energy map is being redrawn. And Turkey stands at the center of the new order, not because of ideology or military force, but because Ankara spent 20 years building something that everyone now needs. The question now is whether Turkey can sustain this policy. Whether the development road gets completed, whether the Zengezur corridor becomes reality, whether Europe continues diversifying toward Turkish transit routes. Those answers will determine whether this moment marks the beginning of a new era of stability or simply creates new tensions and new conflicts over the pipelines Turkey has built. One thing is certain, the world has changed, and Turkey changed it.